very many tourists or visitors to Ireland, especially when they fly into Dublin, the reaction is, where are all the Irish people? Our government went out of its way to offer more benefits to possible, refugees than practically any other country in Europe.
The church died and there was a power grab.
Yeah. We want to be a different Ireland. We want to be Europeans. We want to be cool and hip and play with the big kids.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's amazing guest is a gentleman called Derek Domino, who is from the Republic of Ireland. And over my social media feed over the last year, Ireland is popping up all the time. And it's not surprising they have the same problems that we do, because we're basically cousins. But they seem to have one particular problem a hell of a lot worse than us at the moment, and that's mass immigration. But if you like what Derek has to say, go in the description of this video. His links are there. Subscribe to his channel. But first of all, Derek, thank you for coming on my show.
That's an absolute pleasure, Nick. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to have the chance to chat to yourself and to your viewers, because we live in very strange and interesting times. The saying to be born or to live in interesting times. Well, I'd rather not be living in times interesting in the way these are, because we are facing absolutely monumental upheavals and challenges in our societies, both here and in Britain. And that's why I think conversations like this need to happen, and they need to become more common and normal and often and frequent, because what the UK is going through and has been, let's say, going through for the past 50 years, we here in Ireland are now speed running that. We are doing that at warp speed. So we are both, I think, on the same track, and we are both in a position where ordinary people, just ordinary people going about their daily lives, like yourself and myself, we are noticing things that are, if they keep going, will be irreversible. And we're, if you're like me, I'm looking around thinking, what can we do? What are the solutions? What are the possible ways out of this? Are there any ways out of this? And whilst I talk to people here all the time, it's good to talk to people across the water, because as you say, we are family, we're cousins. Our peoples have been knocking around these islands for millennia, and we let's just say we know each other very well. And so there's a lot of commonality there at the root of it all, and that needs to be brought out more and needs to be explored more, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm, didn't end up in this weird YouTube land thingy as an academic or as some kind of a politico. I've never a member of a political party. I'm not the type of guy who goes out to protests every weekend. I'm very much the man on the Clapham omnibus who at some point felt I had to get off the fence, because what I was seeing and what I could not ignore was the huge changes in what was once a certain type of place and had been that certain type of place in my parents' day, in my grandparents' day, as far back as we could go. And all of a sudden, it seems in the blink of an eye, that whole book has been ripped up and thrown in the bin. And if you dare mention it or criticize it, you get absolutely hammered from the people I'm sure you're aware of and the quarters that I'm sure you're aware of. So that's kind of where I've ended up as a so-called YouTuber, if that's a term, and why we're talking today. Because I, like you, want to have conversations. I try to get to the very root of the problem so that you can, assess the problem, hopefully fix the problem. But we can only do that if we come together, put our heads together, talk about it, toss ideas around, play off each other. Because, as I said, we're both on the same track as far as I'm concerned. But in the case of Ireland, the hour is very, very late for us, because whilst you've been at this particular experiment for a lot longer than we have a tiny population here. We can't soak this type of thing up for very long. We will just be, it's like snuffing out a candle as opposed to your bonfire. It's a whole different level of scale. So, that's why I'm delighted to be here and delighted to be chatting to you. So you pick my brains and I'll pick yours. We see if we can come up with any ideas that might push the thing forward.
Absolutely. So my understanding is Ireland by itself and the UK by itself cannot solve this problem. We're going to have to solve them together because we share a border. And there's no point us solving the problem slightly better than you and pushing all the problems to you for you to then go a little bit harder, solve the problems better than we do. And you push. We need to solve this as two islands next to each other, a family of people who've been living together for millennia. We may have had disagreements in the past. We'll have disagreements going forward, but we are family, and our genetics tell us that we're family. For most people in England, they don't understand Ireland. They don't understand Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland. I do. My dad's from Southern Ireland, from County Offaly, little place called Pulla, just outside Tullamore, right, on the banks of the Grand Canal.
An Offaly man, huh?
Yeah, I'm an Offaly man. Well, my dad was an Offaly man. And then my stepdad is from County Down in Northern Ireland. I've spent for 10 years every summer in Offaly and in County Down, sometimes one or the other, or sometimes both of them. So, as an Englishman, I know Ireland better than most English people. It was always a completely white country. I was born and raised in South Manchester. Most of my friends at school were Asian. I had some black friends. Where I lived was, over my childhood, started off completely white, and then over time changed into a multicultural area, and now is predominantly an Asian area where my mum still lives. But I would go to Ireland, both sides of the border, and have holidays there and never see a black or brown face. And then about 20 years ago, I was with my cousin in Dublin, and he was sat in a pub, of course, and he was complaining about immigration 20, 30 years ago. And it wasn't black and brown faces. It was Eastern Europeans, because they'd started flooding in. And I've not been to Ireland now for a decade or two. But from looking at social media, tell me if I'm wrong, it looks like you now have a huge problem with third world migration into the Republic of Ireland. Is that true? Have I exaggerated it? Or is that just the posts I'm seeing on social media?
No, Nick, that's absolutely true. I mean, what you're seeing is the reality. You might probably not even seeing as much of it as is there. And what I hear from very many tourists or visitors to Ireland, especially when they fly into Dublin, the reaction is, where are all the Irish people? Because they can't seem to find them. And, you go into your local, your coffee shop or your newsagent, there's no Irish staff there. And, we, as you say, were a very, very homogenous country up until very, very recently. Whilst you are, and I know this because, like yourself, I have relatives across the water. I have relatives in Leeds, Bradford, and Surrey, in Wales. And like you would come across to Ireland in the summer, my cousins would come across in the summer. So you'd see them for 2 weeks in July or whatever, and you'd be getting all the whatever was happening over there. They'd have probably better toys than us. The cars were always newer, and so there was that difference. But you would get a sense of how their lives were, and especially my cousins from the north of England, Leeds, Bradford. They would have mentioned, not that it meant anything to me back in the 70s as a child, things about Pakistani people starting to move into their road or to their area. And it was, people were talking about, now, of course, that goes over my head. It means nothing to me. I didn't actually see a real live black person until I think I was 14 or 15. And that's not because I was racist or I was hiding from them or I was trying to avoid them. There just wasn't any. If Lenny Henry showed up it was, big news in Ireland. And we would see them on the telly, but it never translated to the streets. It never translated to the villages, the towns, the suburbs. It was like something that was just happening over in Britain, in the UK, but it didn't affect us. And part of that was probably that there was no reason to come here. There wasn't really anything to come here for. We didn't have a lot of prosperity at the time. Wasn't a lot of jobs. In fact, most people were emigrating, not immigrating. And plus, we had at the time quite a robust immigration system. So it wasn't even easy to get here, even if you wanted to. So, yeah, when it changed, as you say, first with the Eastern Europeans, and that was late 90s. Because, and I remember this well, and at the time I was even involved in the thing as an employer. So I knew our economy in the mid-90s started to kick off because the government had gone out and basically dropped the corporation tax rates purposely to entice in any industries from abroad that they could get their hands on. They didn't particularly care who or where they were from. They were just mad to get them in. So their plan was, and in fairness, it was a good plan in the sense that it worked. They managed to hoover in all these pharmaceutical companies and various other, with high-tech companies and other type of industries. They started to flood in. But because, again, we have such a small population, it didn't take long for us to run out of people to crew these ships, to fan these factories. So the government's next idea was, well, look, we're running out of people. These companies all want to come here. It's marvelous. We're really kicking off now. We're finally joining the civilized world as a real economy, which for us was a novelty. So they were delighted with this. And the plan, as I say, was going great guns. But we ran out of employees, and the companies were turning around and saying, listen, we want to have the factory here, there, wherever it is, with all your, rent free for 5 or 10 years, all the other, gifties that we're giving them. But you've got no staff. Where are we going to get the people? We give no drivers. We have no people to work the forklifts. We've no people to do general stuff. So the great plan was, well, look, let's hoover in. Eastern Europe had opened up at that stage. I'm talking about, for us, it was the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. The Baltic states were the first port of call for us. And as I say, I was part of the system there, but it was very, very rigorous. It was difficult. Number one, you had to go through an agency, let's say. There was private agencies, because it was so cumbersome. You couldn't do it yourself. So you go to this agency, you'd say, look, I need 3 people, guys, for certain jobs. They would do the paperwork. You had to get specific documents with pictures attached. They could only work for you. They couldn't just be a free agent. And they had a specific time where they could stay, and then they had to go home. So it wasn't a free for all. It was very structured. Everybody knew where they stood. They couldn't just arrive and after 3 months go to the factory or the business down the road for an extra tenner. They couldn't do any of that. And they couldn't just apply after 4 months to become a citizen, and they couldn't just bring their family in. So, as I say, that was the system, and that worked for a while. But the thing just kept ballooning. It just kept ballooning to even where that system was too rigid and cumbersome. So then the government decided at some point, oh, look, to hell with it. We'll just go all in. Let's just open we were one of the first ones to hop on the whole open borders thing with Polish and with the other Romanians that came in. I think you guys put it off for a couple of years, didn't you?
No, it was. I didn't realize Ireland had done that, but the UK didn't put any restrictions with the new people who joined. Everyone else in Europe did. We didn't.
We didn't either.
Our government expected 15,000 to arrive, and it was something like 250,000.
That's right. I remember this because even as an ordinary guy, I'd be driving to and from work. The radio would be on. I'd be listening to whatever talking heads were on. As you do, it's just washing over you. You're not invested in it. You're not particularly checking anything out. It's just something that's there in the background. And I remember thinking at the time, right, we're going to open up our borders to essentially 500 million people. And we're 4.5, million. So even I thought at the time, really, is that, has everybody thought this through properly? It seems to me at best quite an experiment, because, as the joke was at the time, if certain suburbs of Manchester just decided to up sticks and move to Ireland, we'd just be Mancunians overnight. We're that small a population in world terms. And I remember thinking, is it really a good plan to play fast and loose with a tiny indigenous population? I mean, is that not a bit helter-skelter? You're not a little bit kind of Russian roulette there? And again, like what you said, I remember the talking heads on the show. Oh, we estimate 10,000 people a year. I mean, how they estimated it, how they could have known it, it was just they were picking numbers out of their hat, because, like yourselves, the floodgates opened. And, within a couple of years, we had a huge Polish population. And now, in fairness to them, they integrated well. The vast majority of absolutely great workers, and they applied themselves, and they weren't a hassle. They integrated. They were very similar to us in lots of ways. Christians and Poles are Catholics. So there was a lot of synergy there. So the government kind of got away with that one. There was no rebellion. There was a bit of disgruntlement here and there, but by and large, people played along. But sometimes the government starts a thing and they get away with it, and they think, well, we're unstoppable now.
Yeah, that works then, so it'll work again.
Yes, we can do even more of it, and nobody will pass any remarks.
I mean, let me tell you, you just mentioned Manchester then. That if a suburb of Manchester emigrated to Ireland, you then would be Mancunians. That might have been true 40 years ago, but let me tell you about Manchester today. The recent census in Manchester, 2021, we found out a year or two later when the data came out, a third of the people who live in Manchester were not even born in the UK. A third of people in Manchester. White English in Manchester is now a minority. It's 42% or something. That's how much my city's changed. And the same thing now is happening, not to your city, but to your whole country.
Mm. Well, you're talking about scale here, Nick. And, like even a small English city has more people in it than my entire nation. It's so when you're talking about mass immigration, as I said, you guys have been at this thing for a long time. So back to the 50s, I think we were, around about that. Whereas we only came to the party very late, but it seems like we're intent on making up for lost time, because even in the Ukrainian crisis, and I know that was a terrible situation, a lot of distress there, our government went out of its way to offer more benefits to possible, refugees than practically any other country in Europe. They literally went out of their way, it seems to me, to entice them to come over. With the result, as you know, if you encourage anything, you get more of it. We got 120,000 Ukrainians basically up sticks and moved to the furthest western corner of Europe, Ireland. That's what happens. And it was actively helped along. It was actively encouraged by the government. Again, as if this is the silver bullet. This is the solution to all our problems. We'll just keep hoovering in people with no thought, it seems to me, no thought about the societal angle. No thought about, well, at what point does Ireland not be Ireland anymore? It might be still called Ireland, but is it Ireland? I mean, I know what Ireland is because I was born into it, I grew up in it, lived it, I've been there all my life. But I'm very often now, and this is a frightening thing, and you probably have experienced this yourself, but it's an ongoing and often thing with me now. I will be in a place, could be a shop, a supermarket, an office, and I'm the only Irish person there. I'm the only Irish person. Now, I don't mean that as in I hate everybody who comes to Ireland and I hate foreigners. It's nothing to do with that. It's just that, and this would be, and I'm not in Dublin. I'm in a small rural town. So it's not like I'm in O'Connell Street and I notice a lot of foreigners. No, this is in a small rural provincial town. And I'm very often the only person there who's Irish, who's actually native Irish. I might even be the only English speaker. I mean, that is a sobering thing to realize in the moment.
It is. Now, let's get into why. Why is this? Why do you think this is happening? Because anyone who knows about Irish history, you fought the English to become independent. We all remember the troubles in Northern Ireland. In your culture, in your country, you have a very strong sense of what it is to be Irish because you've had to fight for that. Otherwise, you'd be British like you used to be, but you're Irish now. Why have the politicians done this? And why have the people allowed it to happen? There's pushback now, which we'll get to in a minute, but why has it happened and why was it allowed to happen?
There was a big cultural change, which a number of things came together. And one of them was the implosion of the Catholic Church. It imploded spectacularly, as we all know the reasons for that. And that had been a bedrock of it. It was the glue that held traditional Irish culture, nationhood, a sense of people. It was very intertwined with the Gaelic sense of Irishness and Gaelic spirit. And as you say, the spirit that made us, allowed us, or got us into a position where we could exit the most powerful empire in the world. And that's no mean feat for a tiny little island that's on your doorstep. It was quite a thing to achieve. But when the Catholic Church imploded as it did, it left a massive vacuum. With the implosion and this, the disappearance off the main stage of the Catholic Church, it took with it conservative Ireland, because all the older heads, the type of people who would have traditionally been driving the bus, had the reins, and were keeping a lid on things, they all got essentially demonized and washed away. And they also lost a lot of faith in themselves, and the Catholic Church was shown to be corrupt and doing very bad things. So the air went out of that balloon completely, and those people got sidelined and demonized, and still to a large extent are. The butt of every joke in modern Ireland is about the church. It's just non-stop. But into that void, into that vacuum, raced all the people who had been kept on the fringes. The people who had been, let's say, kept at bay. They were always there. It's not like they were being rounded up and put in camps. They were always there and allowed to be there and could snipe away at the heart, but they didn't really have any power. They couldn't do anything. So you're talking there about the radical lefties, the real dyed-in-the-wool socialist types. Now, they'd have no interest in Irishness. They're internationalists. They're looking for world things, not Irish things. You also had, of course, the radical feminists. I'm not talking about ordinary women and ordinary feminists. I'm talking about, the nut jobs, the wackos, who always seem to end up at the top of things, the squeaky wheels. They were in there, like straight in there, to get their hands on whatever they could. So you had all these different groups who had been, let's just say, on the fringes of Irish society. Now they were Ireland, because the people who had been running the show and, let's just say, keeping an even hand on the tiller, they were gone. They were obliterated. So what you had then was a complete 360, a complete and utter change. So suddenly, everything that would have been, say, as you might think, traditionally Irish, the spirit, the culture, the history, the sense of nation, or the sense of a tribe, that was now all old hat. No, that's gone. That's all yesterday's news. We want to be a different Ireland. We want to be Europeans. We want to be cool and hip and play with the big kids. So that got what you know of, or would have thought of, and many people have, as how we are, who we are, and what we are. It almost in the blink of an eye, that just disappeared, and it was replaced. It's almost like something Chairman Mao would be proud of. In the schools, in the universities, the whole culture in media, the TV shows, and all that goes with a society flipped. And suddenly it was now uncool to be traditionally Irish. It was uncool to be religious. It was uncool to fly the tricolour, because that's all, that they were dark days as it's painted now. No, they were terrible times. We don't want to be like that. We want to be new and modern and hip, just like the French and the Germans and all these fancy people. We want to be like them. So, does that kind of fill in any gaps there in how or why it might have changed so radically, which it has?
Yeah, I think two things there. The first thing I think you've said basically in a nutshell is the church died and there was a power grab.
Yeah.
And the second thing I want to talk about is, have you just said that it's now unpopular to fly your country's flag?
It is in certain, let's just say in the chattering classes or in the media classes, or, the people who, let's just say, run society.
Yeah, because that's been the case in my country all my life.
Well, no, that's a very new thing.
That's a new thing in Ireland, right?
It's a new thing, and it's not a grassroots thing. It's definitely not. This is a media thing. It's being pushed. It's not organic. I mean, if you saw the protests on Saturday, it was a sea of tricolours. Absolutely, just everywhere.
It was wonderful to see.
I was in the middle of it, and it was just glorious. It was like being back in Ireland again, and I'd almost forgotten how it felt. It's so unusual. And, but the media hate that type of thing. The government hate that type of thing. And, the people, the academics, the people who go on the talking head shows on mainstream media, they poo-poo all that as all, that's, backwards. It's backward looking stuff, because they see themselves as Europeans, or citizens of the world. And to be Irish standing under your flag, a tricolour, which was always the default position in my lifetime. I mean, everybody was like me. Everybody was a patriot. Everybody went to church. Everybody loved being Irish, the plucky Irish, great crack, great bit of fun, few pints and all. Everybody was proud of that. Now, everything that we used to be proud of was deemed backwards. We don't want to be like that anymore. We don't want to teach the children all of that stuff anymore. And in fact, when I speak to young people, which I do occasionally, the things they are being told and taught now in schools about that Ireland and how it was, the way it was, would frighten you, because I'm gobsmacked at how they view the Ireland I grew up in, was born in and grew up in, and was an adult in to a certain point. It's like they've rewritten the history, and they come at me as in, it must have been terrible. I said, what? No, it was amazing. It was way better than what we've got now. But they're told in schools, no, it was a misogynistic culture. The Catholic Church had their jackboot on everybody's neck, and it's patriarchal. It was full of the patriarch. These narratives are now being fed into young people who know no better. They weren't there. And it's only when they meet an old codger like me and I can say, hold on a second. No. None of that is true. And I know because I was there. I was part of it.
And it's very easy to disprove that, Because if Ireland was as bad as they're making out, why would any foreigner want to move there in the first place? People want to move somewhere better. And you look at the selection in Europe where you can move to, or the world you can move to these days, and people are flooding to Ireland. How can it have been such an awful place to live? It just, none of it makes sense. But you're right, people are brainwashed at school because this is a narrative they want. Because if they can tell you your past isn't worth having, the only solution is we'll change your future. And that's what they want. They want to change the future of Ireland and make it part of the international communist regime utopia that they're hoping will come at some point.
Absolutely. And Ireland now is, over the past 10 years at least, maybe a bit longer, it has become the epicenter of wokeness. I mean, Sweden, move over. Ireland has taken your crown because, as I said, the people who moved into the centre were the loonies, the crazies, the nut jobs, the far lefties, the communists, the people who, as you say, want to tear up everything and do a bit of a Khmer Rouge year zero type thing. And books should be changed and history should be changed. And I often say to friends, you know, if they ever remake the 1916 Rising, which is an Irish thing in our history, half the cast will be black. You know, it's a given. It's just a given because history doesn't matter. The truth doesn't matter. It's their truth, you know, that matters. You know, and that's why they hate people like you and me, because we're giving the lie to this because we were there. We lived it. You know, we can see the changes as they happened in real time, whereas we're not buying into this nonsense. So we're the nuisance. You know, we're the impediment to their great, glorious progress towards utopia.
Yep, it's always about utopia for those people. If only you could do what I say, I will bring a much better world for all of us. Anybody who thinks like that is a danger to mankind, because once you think you're semi-divine and only you can bring people peace and prosperity, that's the type of person who will commit the most horrendous atrocities, because they can square that in their own head, as in, if I can kill these people, everybody else will live in paradise. So therefore, that's something I'm willing to do. And with the history of mankind, of people doing that, from Stalin, Hitler, Mao, Genghis Khan, the history is full of these people. They commit atrocities and tell other people, I'm doing it for the benefit of mankind. And unfortunately, we never reach utopia. We just reach a new level of hell. And then we have to dig ourselves out of that level of hell. I think what we probably need to do now is talk about solutions and what we're doing in Ireland. But let's leave that for another session. Derek, thank you so much for coming on here today. People go and go to the description of this video, sign up to your YouTube. It's excellent, lots of good videos. And let's catch up again soon.
Absolutely. It's been an absolute pleasure, Nick, and best of luck with the channel. You're going great guns there. It's going from strength to strength. I'm delighted to see it because people like you and I, that the world needs more of us, because it's going to hell in a handcart. and it's old codgers like us that are standing in the gap at the moment. So absolutely delighted to be here, and hopefully we'll chat again.
Yeah, and well done you. We need voices in Ireland shouting out as well. Thank you.